We are almost halfway, more than halfway into the book. So yesterday, we were able to read to the part where Bodilon, the then Governor General in Nigeria, was making efforts in bringing the North to meet the South, using the ongoing tribal division in the South, led by Azikiwe, and using that same provocation in the North in order to trigger them about the intention of the South to come and control them. Meanwhile, the whole goal is to bring both of them together and make an illusion, an appearance of a country, even though they are so far apart. The country they've kept apart for years, for more than 60 years, they decided to bring them together to form one. And that was where we were. And that was when Ahmadu Bello, Sardauna Sokoto, got introduced into the scene. And yesterday we didn't finish chapter 6. So we will this afternoon. And then we will get on to the next chapter, chapter 7. See how long that will take us. And hopefully, I would cover enough ground and possibly take calls, because I know a lot of you want to react to this as soon as possible, right? But let's do this. So yesterday, it was the Ahmadu Bello's introduction. However, we didn't finish much on Ahmadu Bello, so I'm going to just read on. And I bet if you were here yesterday, you will easily catch up, Abi. You should. Anyway, thank you. So, remember that Ahmadu Bello was supposed to be the Sultan of Sokoto, but somehow the British had somebody else in mind. So they made Ahmadu Bello deputy Sultan. So they appointed a Sultan and they made Ahmadu Bello Sardauna Sokoto. And the new Sultan jailed Ahmadu Bello for 1 year for embezzlement, for corruption. But the British quickly arranged a local government training course for him in England. So they saved him from going to jail because they actually wanted to use him for something. And they did not want anything to stop them from doing that. Remember that part, right? Now let's continue. The British intervention changed the destiny of the two contenders. Okay, I think I've read that part already. So let's go to the next page. So when it came to party formation also, Bello's experience was very different from that of Awolowo. In the West, with the Action Group and Azikiwe in the East, with the NCNC. The Northern People's Congress, NPC, when it was formed on 1st October 1951, was not his brainchild, but by 1954, he had emerged as the leader of the party. Again, this was largely due to behind-the-scenes work by Sherwood Smith. Like Azikiwe in the East, being one of the first of a new generation to be trained in Western ways, the role that had been mapped out for Bello was to be the champion of his people. At the headline level, at least, this was to be all the people of the North and only indirectly his Fulani people. The ground for his Northern unification or unification drive had been prepared well ahead of him with the creation in 1922 by Governor Hugh Clifford of what was to become Barewa College, as a school through which all the leading political figures from the North would pass. In keeping with Bodilon's master plan, the Old Boys Association of Barewa College is reported to have started espousing the One North ideology in 1939. Bello's outlook, Bello's outlook for Nigeria was wholly shaped by this One North vision. His priority was to screen the North from Southern influence and control, the fear of which had been instilled in him and his colleagues by Sherwood Smith and the Colonial Office. As a result, he wanted as little as possible to do with the South, and at times veered towards complete separation of the North from the South. The closeness of his working relationship with Sherwood Smith and the understanding between the Fulani leadership and the British dictated that his position on independence differed greatly from the nationalists. According to Ahmadu Bello's view, he said, "We were never militant nationalists, as some were. We were sure that in God's time, in God's good time, we would get the power. The British had promised this frequently, and we were content to rest on these promises." Then, Tafawa Balewa. If One North was to have meaning, it meant that all sections of the North had to be brought within the NPC fold under the leadership of the Sardauna. It was a task only British authority could bring about. The manner in which Sherwood Smith went about it varied with the territory. In Bauchi, a man who Sherwood Smith and his team had identified to partner with Bello was Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, a product of Barewa College. In common with many of the leaders in the North, Balewa was a teacher. He had been selected to represent Bauchi in the Northern House of Assembly and had joined the NPC at the same time with the Sardauna. Indeed, the accounts suggest that he was the popular choice to be the leader of the NPC, if only to check the influence of Sherwood Smith, but on receiving reports to this effect on the eve of the party's convention in Jos in 1954, he is reported to have renounced the leadership in favor of Bello. That the decision was influenced by Sherwood Smith and his team can be deduced from another account, in quotes. The Jos convention was perplexing because Balewa was the choice of many. Yet, Kano lorries came, which supported the Sardauna, and Borno supported the Sardauna wholeheartedly. In fact, Borno, Kano, Sokoto, Zaria supported the Sardauna, and the Sardauna even had some supporters from Bauchi. Balewa's support came from Adamawa and Bauchi. Balewa was younger than the Sardauna and was very charismatic, but many supporters came from the NAs, whatever, and they supported the Sardauna. This was how, in the North, Ahmadu Bello from the Northwest and Tafawa Balewa from the Northeast were able to work together under a single political umbrella, covering the whole of the North. While the South, Awolowo from the West and Azikiwe from the East, ended up forming rival political parties. Awolowo and Azikiwe were both devout Christians, just as the Sardauna and Balewa were devout Muslims. The distance from Awolowo's hometown in Ijebu-Remo to Azikiwe's hometown in Onitsha was far shorter than the distance from Sardauna's Sokoto to Balewa's Bauchi. The fault and credit lay not in the individual actors, but with Bodilon and his team, who devised and implemented the policy of promoting one North, while at the same time creating a divided South. The political unity of the North was made all the stronger by the clear line of authority in the power relationship that existed between Ahmadu Bello and as the premier of the northern region, and Tafawa Balewa as the prime minister of the Nigerian Federation, which appears in the biography of H.O. Davis as follows. I remember when we were in front of the Sardauna's house, when the Sardauna was not yet in the lounge. We all, including the prime minister, had to wait in front of the door. When the Sardauna arrived in the lounge and had taken his seat, the door was opened for us to go in. I observed that the prime minister took off his shoes before he entered, and naturally, all of us had to do the same. When we got in, the Sardauna was sitting on the chair, and the prime minister, on entering, sat on the floor in front of the Sardauna. We all had to do the same or kneel down. The Adamawa Fulani, the Kanuri, and the Middle Belt peoples. Adamawa and Borono presented a very different challenge to Sherwood Smith's quest to bring the whole of the North under Bello's leadership. Forceful action was required. According to Sherwood's account, the time had now come for drastic action in two specific administrations, both headed by powerful chiefs, where corruption and misrule had become a public scandal. Indeed, all chiefs must be made to realize that great changes lay ahead, and they must adapt themselves to those changes. The two administrations in question were those of Adamawa and Borno. Such matters were my personal responsibility, and it was to Adamawa that I went first. It was back to the Lugard pacification tactics of old, as Sherwood Smith gave the Lamido in Adamawa a straightforward choice between accepting retirement to another emirate on a pension, effectively exile, or being forcibly deposed. The Lamido in Adamawa chose retirement. The Shehu of Borno was not so easy. It will be recalled that Borno had been brought into the empire by acquisition from France rather than through conquest by Lugard, as with the rest of the North. This and the distinct Kanuri language had compelled the British to settle for a light grip on the territory. It was very different from the intimate relationship they had with the Fulani. The Kanuri people, having driven the Fulani out of Borno when Uthman Dan Fodio had attempted to carry his jihad into their land, were never going to willingly accept coming under Fulani leadership through the person of Bello. Only with a show of British military readiness to force the situation, and with Sherwood Smith sitting by his side, did the Shehu of Borno give in to the changes insisted upon. As for the non-Muslim people of the Middle Belt, in Jos, Benue, and Niger, Sherwood Smith adopted a more diplomatic approach by impressing upon the leadership of the NPC the imperative of giving key players from these regions a role on the executive council of the party. Ahmadu Bello's appointment as premier of the Northern Nigeria in 1954 gave him the platform and authority with which, with the guidance and assistance of Sherwood Smith, he was able to make the necessary changes in leadership across the North. The number of concessions to traditional leadership which occurred between the time Sardauna becomes premier in 1954 and independence in 1960 is considerable. During the same period, 1954 to 1960, a number of chiefs are disposed, abdicate, or voluntarily resign. The general pattern is for appointments to be made of younger, Western educated men, or of men who have allied themselves with the Sardauna in one way or another. Aminu Kano, one northerner who was not selected by Sherwood Smith and who was therefore less amenable to his plan was Aminu Kano. Despite having been colleagues with Balewa at Barewa College and the University of London's Institute of Education, he pursued a political path which took him into collaboration with Azikiwe, Nnamdi Azikiwe. Aminu Kano had been a member of the Arewa organization, out of which the NPC was born, alongside Balewa and Bello, before breaking away to form the Northern Elements Progressive Union, NEPU, as the first political organization in Northern Nigeria on 8 August 1950. The break was ideological. He and other young Northerners wanted to dismantle the feudal order, which NPC was bent upon preserving. This socialist, class-based ideology marked NEPU as a threat to this socialist class-based ideology marked NEPU as a threat to the One North agenda. It manifested in NEPU standing in opposition to NPC's North First outlook and in Aminu Kano lining up with Azikiwe and his One Nigeria position. The intrinsic appeal of NEPU's reform agenda for the North was obvious. It was only inconvenient to the British plans. The moral dilemma for those responsible for implementing the policy was revealed by Sherwood Smith himself. He wrote, "I had always been a fervent believer in the Lugard doctrine and in the part that the chiefs of the North must play in the administration of the country. But I had always instinctively felt also that it was wrong that they should be forever sacrosanct in their persons, and that the system that they represented should remain inviolate for all time. Surely, neither common justice nor sane politics could permit the continuation in office of men in whose name or at whose instance the poor and helpless were oppressed. Yet, to take just one example, there was a chief in Niger province who represented all that seemed to me objectionable in a ruler. As a judge, he was venal. As an administrator, he was extortionate. His word was valueless, and his fingers were forever sticky with other men's honey. His people disliked and despised him, yet he would not change. It seemed that no other course remained short of deposition. But when I made my case to my chief commissioner, he replied, What, Sherwood Smith? Depose the second-class chief? Heaven forfend, whatever. So, Other and less effective means are to be sought to contain his cupidity and fear his subjects' distress. This was Sherwood Smith. So the key political actors in the North and in the South having emerged or been selected, the race for power at independence was set to begin with the British as the umpires of the contest. So that is the end of the chapter 6, right? So I could use that as a my tea break, even though it's going to be the shortest tea breaks, though. I see very much roasting. But yeah, let's continue. Chapter 7. Now the chapter 7 is the independence show. So Mr. Lennox said, Boy's success is due to his real affection for the colonies and to an infinite capacity for taking pains. It has also been due to a cheerful willingness to discard, where need be, the conventions of Whitehall. British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, in quote. So, the independence show, the Igbo challenge. A number of factors combined to ensure that despite the relationship with Azikiwe, Igbo people were going to pose the biggest problem for the colonial office plan for the continuation of colonial rule in Nigeria. To begin with, they were Democrats by habit, lacking the tradition of rule by chiefs or by emirs. The system of indirect rule through traditional rulers, which the colonial office favored, had been impossible to apply to them. The attempt to install a system of rule by warrant chiefs created by colonial office had failed after the women's uprising of 1929. To compound matters, Azikiwe's hold on the people was of recent manufacture and did not run deep. Added to this was the fact that British interaction with the Igbos, situated as they were in the eastern hinterland, was relatively recent compared with the longer trading experience with the coastal communities in the south. The third and most significant factor was a byproduct of the action which the strategists in the colonial office had taken to fast-track the Igbos to compete with the Yoruba in the field of education. With no traditional rulers in Igbo land to temper the demands of the young, educated Igbos, the relationship between the colonial government and the eastern region became increasingly difficult and heated. In their grand planning to check and contain the power and influence of the first group of educated natives from the southwest, the British strategists had created a new group of educated natives in the southeast. Azikiwe himself was far from dependable. He was often torn between his instincts as an anti-colonial campaigner born of his education and American experience, and the bond that he had struck to work with the British. The colonial government's plan for self-government after the war was a theme that he had visited previously in his pilot newspaper. He returned to the issue more directly in the edition of 14th November 1940. And Azikiwe wrote then, "Are Nigerians fighting to maintain the status quo, or are they to expect a new world order after this sacrifice is over? We want the governor to tell us." This was, of course, the same question that the American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was asking of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in the negotiation which were ongoing between them over America's entry into the Second World War and over the terms of the Atlantic Charter. The answer that came back from the governor in a speech in December 1940 was unyielding. According to the governor, the correct but perhaps rather brutal answer would be that it is unusual for a man to expect a reward for failing to cut his own throat. With this answer, the Babylon mask had slipped. The rebuff, followed by the publication of the Atlantic Charter on the 14th August 1941, was to signal a hardening of the relationship between the nationalists and the colonial government. Governor Arthur Richards. In character and style, Governor Richards' appointment was the colonial government's response to the changing relationship with the nationalists now that the empire had come through the attack by Hitler's Germany and outlived the champion of decolonization, US President Roosevelt. It was an attempt to reassert the authority of the empire. The days of the warm and personal style of Babylon was over. It was now to be a matter of hard talking on both sides. When Babylon had first set out for Nigeria from Liverpool back in October 1935, his companion on the ship was Sir Arthur Richards, who was then the governor of the Gambia. While Babylon had prepared the ground for the injection of regionalism into the nascent politics of Nigeria, it was Richards, with the help of Babylon's parting gift, a final memorandum on the constitutional future of Nigeria, published in August 1943, who concretized it by converting what were regional centers of administration into political units. Richard found further assistance from Lord Lugard, now aged 85, but still came to offer advice to the new governor on Nigeria and its progress. The new constitution, which Richards introduced in 1946, ran into difficulty much sooner than the British had expected. Whilst offering the trappings of democracy by establishing an embryo parliament in the form of a new all-Nigeria Legislative Council, the separate houses of assembly for each of the three regions, with a House of Chiefs in the north alone. It was built upon the defective foundation of the skewed regionalism that Babylon had introduced, precisely because it had been designed to minimize the influence of the educated natives. It had been imposed without any consultation. Yes, Sir Bernard did have criticism to make, and in particular, the Nigerians had not been consulted enough or given sufficient opportunity to discuss the proposals. The new scheme was hastily rushed through the LegCo. Local opinion was not sounded, and such an ex-cathedra imposition of reforms was a maladroit example of the way a colonial government should not behave. It is scarcely surprising that Nigerian nationalists had similar criticism to make about the way their constitution had been thrust upon them. Even though they had no lawmaking powers, their role being confined to deliberation and advice on legislative proposals from the Legislative Council. Still, the composition of the regional houses of assembly left little room for the truly unofficial voices to be heard. In the Western House of Assembly, for example, where the educated natives were most vocal, the closest the assembly came to having representatives of the people were the 7 to 11 members who were selected by the native authority from amongst their member. But since the native authority was effectively made up of traditional rulers, this was no representation at all. with the balance of official and unofficial members being replicated in the Legislative Council, 21 to 28, ratio 21 to 28. And with the unofficial members being drawn from membership of the regional houses of assembly, this arrangement where there will be representative government, but not by way of direct elections, was never going to satisfy the nationalists. Nationalists strongly resented the system of election provided for in the Richards proposals. No change was made in the number of legislative council members elected directly by Nigerians. Only the people of Lagos and Calabar were given the opportunity to elect representatives directly to the Legislative Council, a privilege they had exercised since 1923. All other representatives were